What I want to explain is what happened when artificial intelligence finally read something humans couldn't, and why that discovery scared the people who made it so much they stopped talking to the press. In 1947, a shepherd in the Judean desert found 7 clay jars sealed with wax. Inside were fragments of the oldest Bible on earth. We call them the Dead Sea Scrolls. About 25,000 pieces of leather, parchment, and papyrus. Some are smaller than your thumbnail. Some are so faded you can barely see the ink. These scrolls predate every Bible we use today by over 1,000 years. For 75 years, scholars tried to read them. And I need you to understand how impossibly hard that was. Imagine the actual problem. A fragment has 3 letters on it. Those letters belong to a word. That word is part of a verse. That verse might connect to another fragment sitting in a completely different archive on another continent. A scholar in one country spends a decade studying one column of text. The piece that would answer their entire question sits photographed in a sealed collection somewhere else. Never connected. Never even in the same conversation. The fragments were scattered across dozens of institutions, dozens of languages, dozens of competing academic agendas. Some pieces are so small, the ink matches the leather's color perfectly. A human eye looking straight at it sees nothing. They're not missing the text because it's gone. They're missing it because human eyes were never built to catch it. This is what I mean by the limit being us, not the scrolls. The evidence survived. The physical parchment survived. But no single human mind could hold all 25,000 fragments in view at once. Cross-reference them simultaneously. Compare every faded stroke against every other faded stroke across the entire collection. The wall the entire field hit wasn't evidence. It was human capacity. Then, in 2024, everything changed. A research team across 3 universities fed the complete archive into an artificial intelligence system. Not just the physical scrolls, every photograph, every infrared scan, every multispectral image taken across decades, all of it loaded into a deep learning model trained specifically on ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek handwriting. The machine ran for 96 hours straight. When it finished, the scholars didn't celebrate. The room went quiet. They started meeting behind closed doors. And they haven't stopped since. Here's what happened. The AI didn't just read the scrolls, it rebuilt them. The imaging technology started with light at different wavelengths. Visible light first, then infrared, which pulls out ink that's faded to invisibility, then ultraviolet, which makes organic compounds glow. A fragment that looked completely blank lit up under infrared and revealed an entire line of text, invisible to human eyes, for 2,000 years. The ink never disappeared. It sank into the parchment. It changed form. It became undetectable to human vision, but left traces that the right wavelength of light could pull back to the surface. The technology wasn't adding anything. It was revealing what was already there. To me, that detail matters enormously. The words weren't lost. We were just looking with the wrong eyes. Then the machine did something humans couldn't. It matched fragments that had been separated for decades. Pieces that physically belonged together but lived in different collections, studied by different scholars, never once recognized as parts of the same original document. The machine examined everything in a single pass and connected what no human conversation had ever joined together. It detected palimpsests, places where text was scraped away and written over, earlier versions erased so a scribe could reuse expensive parchment. Some of those erased passages matched texts we already know. Some matched nothing in the entire scroll's corpus. That last group is the real story. Those unmatched passages may be writings that existed nowhere else on Earth. Someone scraped them off because a later scribe decided something else was more important. We don't have those documents. All we have is the ghost of them. But the part that actually frightened the researchers came from handwriting analysis. The machine flagged a section from the Book of Nahum. The handwriting there was wrong. Not different. Wrong. Jagged. Rushed. Uneven. The spacing between letters lurched unpredictably. The pressure behind each stroke jumped from word to word. The lines drifted off horizontal. Everything about it pointed to a scribe writing fast under intense stress. No controlled precision. This wasn't a clumsy copyist. This was a skilled person whose hand had stopped being steady. Something had changed between one passage and the next. What I understand now is this. The machine didn't just measure letter forms. It measured fear, the tremor in the strokes, the small hesitations, where the pen stopped dead in the middle of a word, the broken rhythm of a hand that was cold or exhausted or terrified. 2,000 years collapsed into the gap between two letters. These fragments were found in a cave called the Cave of Horror. In 2021, archaeologists excavated it completely for the first time. They found about 40 skeletons. Men, women, children. These were Jewish refugees hiding during the Bar Kokhba revolt against Rome around 132 to 136 CE. The Romans tracked them to that cave, set up camp on the cliffs above, and waited. No water inside, no food, no way out. The refugees died trapped between Roman soldiers and a 250-foot drop. Their bones stayed in that cave for nearly 1,900 years. And in their final days, with soldiers overhead and the water gone, some of them were still copying scripture, still guarding the words. The machine detected the physical evidence of that act, the pressure of a pen held by someone who knew death was coming. That's not data. That's human courage pressed directly into parchment. What rattled the researchers most wasn't the fear in one scroll. It was what the machine found when it examined all 25,000 fragments at once. The standard story says one Jewish sect called the Essenes lived near the caves. They copied texts as part of religious practice. When Rome closed in, they hid their library. One community, one library, clean and simple. The machine dismantled that narrative completely. The scrolls were written by dozens of different scribes, possibly hundreds, working across at least 200 years. The handwriting analysis identified distinct hands scattered throughout the entire collection. Some scribes appeared in multiple scrolls across long careers. Others appeared once and disappeared. That's far more variety than any isolated sect could produce. This is not one community copying its books over a single lifetime. This is generations. People who were born, grew old, and died, handing the work to the next generation. The language problem confirms this. The scrolls contain Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Paleo-Hebrew, an archaic script out of everyday use for centuries. By the time these texts were written, why would one small isolated community preserve scripture in 4 completely different writing systems? The machine pointed toward an answer that changes everything. The scrolls may not be one library at all. They may be a rescue operation. As Rome tightened its grip on Judea, as the temple fell in 70 CE, as Jewish communities were scattered and slaughtered across the region, sacred texts from across the entire area were gathered and hidden in desert caves. Not one sect's collection, a civilization's emergency archive, the last surviving pieces of a diverse Jewish literary world, carried into the caves by people who knew their world was ending. This is massively different from what scholars assumed. The Greek texts might be from Hellenized Jewish communities in coastal cities, Hebrew from traditional communities near Jerusalem, Aramaic from rural populations speaking the everyday language. Different communities, different caves, all reaching for the same darkness at the same doomed moment. To me, this makes the discovery exponentially larger. Every fragment is a decision made under pressure. Someone stood in front of holy writings. They knew soldiers were coming. They knew they couldn't carry everything. They chose what to save and what to leave behind. Once the machine understood that pattern, it noticed something even louder than what was in the caves. It noticed what was missing. The Book of Esther doesn't appear. Not one fragment of Esther in 25,000 pieces. And Chronicles is nearly absent too, surviving only in the smallest, most uncertain scraps. This is genuinely strange. Esther isn't a minor book. It explains the origin of Purim, one of the most celebrated Jewish holidays. It tells the story of Jewish survival under a hostile empire. That theme should have resonated powerfully with communities being hunted into desert caves. Of every book to be missing, this is the one that should have spoken loudest to them. The traditional explanation is theological. The Qumran community rejected Esther because the book never explicitly names God. But the machine's analysis pointed somewhere more human. If the scrolls are a rescue operation, rather than a curated collection, then the absence isn't a theological judgment. It's a casualty. Someone couldn't reach it in time. Someone couldn't carry it. It was left on the shelf when the choice came down to a single armful of parchment and a long, terrified climb into a hidden cave. For generations, people read that gap as a judgment. But if these are the books people grabbed while running for their lives, the missing book may simply be the one someone couldn't get to. Lost not because anyone condemned it. Lost because hands can only carry so much when soldiers are coming. What they saved tells us what they valued most. What they left behind tells us what the moment cost them. The machine then turned to what the texts actually said. And this is where the real implications emerge. The Greek fragments were supposed to match the standard Septuagint. The ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible produced in Alexandria starting around the 3rd century BCE. The the standard Greek scripture across the Mediterranean world, later adopted by early Christians as their Old Testament. These fragments didn't match. Not entirely. Word choices differed. Phrases sat in different arrangements. Some passages appeared translated independently, rather than copied from the standard text. At the moment, these texts were copied and hidden. There was no single fixed Greek scripture. There were competing versions in circulation, each one treated as authoritative by the community that used it. The same pattern appeared in Hebrew texts. Fragments showed variations from the Masoretic text, the standardized Hebrew Bible that wasn't finalized until centuries after these scrolls were sealed in their jars. The Masoretic text is the foundation beneath every modern Jewish Bible and most Christian Old Testaments. The scrolls predate it, and the scrolls tell a different story, different verses, different emphases. Passages that appear in the scrolls and never make it into the later standardized version. This is the crucial part. The Bible wasn't delivered as a finished, sealed document. It was shaped across centuries, edited, argued over, revised. The version that exists today is the end result of choices that later communities made about which texts to include, which readings to trust, which versions to lock in as correct. The scrolls preserve the moment before those choices were finalized. A tradition still alive, still contested, still being interpreted in competing ways by different communities before standardization quietly erased the differences. The machine found fingerprints of that process everywhere in the collection. Scribal corrections, where later readers adjusted passages to match the version they preferred. Erasers, where text was scraped off and replaced. Margin notes, where scribes recorded variant readings. Fully aware that other versions existed, and uncertain which one was right. These are marks of a living tradition, still being shaped and argued over when the Romans arrived and destroyed the communities guarding it. After that came standardization. One version became the authority. The variants were forgotten. The diversity faded from memory until almost no one remembered it had ever existed. What I find significant about this is that it's not controversial information. It's just honest. The parchment records what actually happened. So here's what matters. The scrolls aren't a single unified message frozen in time. They're layers of messages. Voices stacked across centuries, sometimes agreeing, sometimes contradicting, sometimes erasing what an earlier voice had said. The fragments from the Cave of Horror, copied by people who knew they might not live to see morning, hidden by people who only hoped someone would someday find them, are part of that chorus. They waited in the dark for nearly 2,000 years. The machine finally read them, not as a secret, as a story. The story of how Scripture was really constructed, how faith was argued over, copied with variations, edited under pressure, shaped by human hands long before it settled into the texts the world holds today. For me, the main thing is this. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal the Bible as what it always was, a human effort to preserve something sacred and carry it forward across generations against fire, against empire, against time itself. The people who hid those scrolls in the cave knew they were going to die. They copied the texts anyway. They sealed them in jars anyway. They hoped that somehow someone would find them and understand. That hope was answered first by a shepherd chasing a lost goat, then by scholars who spent 75 years piecing fragments together, and now by a machine that can read what no human eye ever could. History is never simple. Faith was never simple. The scrolls are the proof, and the machine is still reading.